if you look at how we, just operate in the modern world, our entire concept of power is basically built around accumulation.
Right. Yeah. Hoarding resources.
Exactly. Hoarding. Like you think about wealth or influence or honestly, even just the battery in your phone. You plug it into the wall, it gathers energy, the percentage ticks up, and suddenly, boom, you have the capacity to act.
Yeah, you're ready to go.
Right. And the moment you unplug and start operating, that reserve depletes and hitting absolute zero. I mean, that is our ultimate cultural nightmare.
Oh, for sure.
We are just deeply, deeply conditioned to avoid emptiness because in our framework anyway, emptiness is just the exact equivalent of being completely powerless.
Well, and that makes total sense from a strictly biological and economic standpoint. I mean, survival traditionally dictates that a lack of resources, whether that's caloric or financial, is a huge vulnerability.
Yeah.
We build these massive, complex infrastructures to insulate ourselves from ever having to experience true depletion.
But, and this is what we're getting into today, what happens when you intentionally step outside of that framework?
Yeah.
Like, what if you look at a system where the mechanics of power operate in reverse?
Which is such a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. I was thinking about the physics of a siphon. A siphon only moves water, like it only generates that kinetic flow if the receiving end is positioned lower and is emptier than the source.
Right. The emptiness itself creates the vacuum.
Exactly. The depletion is the engine that actually pulls the power.
Yeah.
And that physical reality is the exact mechanism we are exploring in our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We're unpacking a specific text used by a community that is actively weaponizing emptiness.
Weaponizing emptiness. That is it's a fascinating way to phrase it considering the physical reality of what this community is actually doing.
It really is the only way to describe it. So just for context for you listening, we are looking at the daily devotional utilized by Baseline Family Church. And this congregation engages in a pretty severe recurring physical discipline. For the first 5 days of every single month, from February all the way through November, they undertake a church-wide liquid fast.
Wow.
Yeah. And they rely on this specific devotional to guide them through that intense physical challenge. So today, we're specifically analyzing their material for the month of April, where the overarching theme is, fittingly enough, power.
And we're really zeroing in on day one of this text, right?
Yes, day one. It's titled Prayer, the Place Where Power Begins.
And the mission of this deep dive is to understand that exact intersection, like how a community uses the physical depletion of a liquid fast, not just as some test of willpower, but as a deliberate doorway to life-altering power.
Right.
Because the devotional that doesn't offer these little platitudes to make the hunger go away. It actively attempts to rewire how the reader conceptualizes spiritual mechanics.
Yes, and to understand how Baseline Family Church actually approaches this 5-day liquid fast, we have to look at how they define the core activity accompanying it.
The prayer aspect.
Exactly. The text radically redefines prayer, kind of dragging it away from this dry, obligatory item on a religious checklist.
Right. No one likes a checklist.
No, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
It reframes it from a rigid discipline into an absolute lifeline. The devotional describes prayer as the place where heaven meets earth, where your heart meets God's presence, and, I love this phrase, where faith takes its first breath.
Yeah, that phrase where faith takes its first breath is critical because it signals this transition from theory to, an autonomic reality.
Like breathing.
Exactly like breathing. Breathing isn't something you schedule on your calendar. It's a constant, involuntary requirement for life. And the devotional actually brings in 3 distinct voices to solidify this architectural shift in how prayer is viewed. First, it cites Rick Warren.
Okay, yeah.
And Warren refers to prayer as the pipeline of God's power.
Which, my reading of Warren's pipeline metaphor is that it perfectly aligns with that siphon concept we discussed earlier.
Oh, absolutely.
A pipeline isn't a storage tank, right? It's a conduit. It implies that power isn't something you just accumulate and hold on to in a little battery. It's something that flows through you, provided there's a pressure differential.
Yeah.
So the physical fast creates the low pressure, the emptiness, that literally allows the power to flow.
That is a highly functional way to look at it. And it leads directly into the second perspective the devotional introduces, which is from Craig Groeschel.
Yes. The diagnostic part.
Right. He teaches that your prayers reflect your actual underlying belief about God.
I found that point incredibly abrasive, honestly.
Really? How so?
Well, abrasive, but in a necessary way. It functions as a diagnostic tool. Think about it. If you're fasting, your physical body is under extreme stress.
Oh, yeah. Your cognitive load is strained, energy reserves are tanking.
Exactly. And in that state, you just lack the caloric energy to maintain a facade. All that performative religion just drops away. Groschel's theory suggests that under the pressure of a fast, whatever you pray, or honestly, whatever you don't pray, reveals your baseline theology.
Right, like what you actually believe when the chips are down.
Yeah. If you only pray for basic survival, like, please let me get through this fast, you view God as a vending machine. If you just stop praying because you're tired, you view it as a transaction rather than a relationship.
Which is exactly where the third voice comes in, John Bevere. He explicitly reminds the reader that prayer is a relationship, not a ritual.
Right.
If you combine these three, so you've got Warren's pipeline, Groschel's diagnostic, and Bevere's relational context, the devotional is essentially building a psychological safety net for the person fasting.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it. A safety net.
Yeah, because it's saying, hey, you are about to be very, very physically uncomfortable. Do not treat this connection like a transaction or you will fail.
And this all culminates in a really piercing self-reflection question the text poses to the reader. It asks, do I treat prayer as my last resort or my first response? Last resort or first response. Yeah. And we often hear metaphors about parachutes here. You know, don't wait until you're actively falling out of the plane to pull the cord.
Yeah.
Right. But I think a more accurate analogy for what the devotional is actually doing involves the concept of structural load-bearing in a building.
Okay, I like this. Keep going.
So treating prayer as a last resort is like trying to install a massive steel support beam while the roof is actively collapsing on your head.
Oh, man.
Right. It's a total panic response to a structural failure. But treating it as a first response is laying the foundation before the walls even go up. You are acknowledging the inevitability of the weight before the structure is ever even tested.
I really like that structural analogy because it speaks directly to the mind-body connection during a multi-day liquid fast. Let's look at the physiology for a second.
Yeah, please.
When you are on a liquid fast, your body is continuously releasing ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone.
Right. The thing that makes your stomach growl.
Exactly. It's sending undeniable, acute pain signals to your brain saying, hey, we have a structural deficit, consume calories immediately. And usually that signal triggers a physical response. You go to the fridge, you eat. But during this fast, you're intentionally denying that physical resolution.
Right. You're literally forcing your brain to just sit with an unresolved alarm blaring in the background.
Yeah.
But I actually have a theory about what the devotional is trying to accomplish with this first response framing. It seems to me that it's essentially hacking the brain's habit loop.
Okay. How so?
Like every single time that ghrelin spikes and the stomach growls, the text wants the reader to reprogram that physical pain signal to act as a psychological trigger for prayer.
Wow. Yes, that is precisely the mechanism at play. Because if prayer remains a last resort, then the hunger just feels like starvation.
Right. It's just miserable suffering.
Exactly. But if prayer is the first response, then the physical depletion suddenly becomes the catalyst. The biological alarm bell of hunger is totally repurposed into a spiritual notification to, connect to the pipeline.
Yeah.
The emptiness is no longer this void to be feared. It is the deliberate opening required for that siphon to actually work.
Yeah. Okay, so once the devotional establishes this internal posture, this incredible rewiring of physical pain into a spiritual lifeline, it immediately shifts outward.
It doesn't let you just stay internal.
No, it really doesn't. It doesn't allow the reader to just sit alone in a dark room and meditate on how hungry they are. It aggressively maps out how this internal reality physically alters external environments. It moves in these concentric circles of friction, starting with the most intimate and, let's be honest, often the most volatile space.
The home and the marriage.
Yes, the home.
And the claims the text makes here are pretty bold. It states that prayer shifts the atmosphere in the home, it softens tensions, and it protects unity.
Yeah.
Specifically regarding marriage, it argues that prayer heals what time and words cannot. It says, and I'm quoting here, prayer ties your hearts to God so your hearts can stay tied to each other.
I really want to dissect the mechanics of that because the cliche is that when people are hungry, they get hangry.
Oh, absolutely. Irritable, defensive, short-tempered.
Right. So a 5-day liquid fast sounds like an absolute recipe for domestic disaster.
Yeah, you'd think so.
How does the text possibly justify the claim that this state actually softens tension?
Well, it really comes down to the dismantling of ego.
Okay.
Think about it. In a marriage, tension is usually sustained by defensive posturing. It's the need to be right, the need to control the narrative of the argument.
Yeah, for sure.
The devotional is suggesting that when you are physically depleted by the fast and you're actively using that depletion to trigger a reliance on God rather than relying on your own, argumentative stamina.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you simply don't have the ego reserves to maintain a petty fight. By placing the relationship at the feet of a higher power, you're short-circuiting that whole cycle of human retaliation. You're admitting, as the text says, that your own words are insufficient.
That makes so much sense. The physical weakness actually forces a psychological surrender, which instantly de-escalates the conflict.
Yeah.
And we see this theme of relinquishing control continue right into the next circle, which is parenting. The devotional claims that prayer covers children, leads them when words fall short, and fights unseen battles for them.
Unseen battle.
Yeah, it's a direct confrontation with the illusion of parental control. You know you cannot physically protect your children from everything in the world, but this text argues you can actively engage in their defense through that pipeline of prayer.
It's a hugely empowering psychological shift for a parent. Instead of being just paralyzed by anxiety over all the variables they can't control, they're given an active, combative role in the unseen realm.
But, okay, here's where I really struggle with the text, or at least where I think the friction is at its absolute highest.
Where's that?
The devotional moves from the home and the kids directly into the workplace.
Ah, yes, the office.
It asserts that prayer gives wisdom in decisions, calm under pressure, and invites the Holy Spirit into mundane meetings and tasks. But let's be brutally realistic here. Let's say you're a member of Baseline Family Church. It is day 3 of your liquid fast. You are running on nothing but water and maybe some broth.
Yeah, you're exhausted.
You are sitting at your desk. There is a massive error on a financial spreadsheet, and your boss is furious.
Panic time.
Exactly.
Ugh.
Corporate culture demands relentless high-energy output. My secular, practical brain looks at a fasted employee in that moment and sees a liability, like a literal drop in cognitive processing speed. How on earth does this text bridge the deeply spiritual act of intentional starvation with the capitalist demands of a stressful office job?
That is the ultimate stress test for this entire theology.
Yeah.
What the devotional is doing here is refusing to allow the reader to bifurcate their life into sacred and secular. It forces the spiritual discipline right into the boardroom.
Okay.
And to address your point about cognitive processing,
Yeah.
yes, the brain requires glucose, obviously. But the text is drawing a hard distinction between frantic, ego-driven mental energy and grounded external wisdom.
So you're saying the calm under pressure it talks about isn't about having a faster brain. It's about having a less reactive brain.
Exactly. In a high-pressure office environment, mistakes escalate because people panic, they try to cover their tracks, or they lash out due to stress.
Yeah, the classic office meltdown.
Right. The devotional posits that inviting the Holy Spirit into those small or unseen tasks fundamentally changes the operational dynamics. The fasted employee isn't relying on their own depleted intellect to muscle through the spreadsheet error.
Oh, I see.
The physical witness serves as a real-time, tactile reminder that they are tapped into a totally different power source. It forces a cognitive pause. Instead of reacting out of corporate terror, they respond from a posture of spiritual security.
It's the siphon again.
Yes.
The corporate world tells you to puff yourself up, right? Accumulate data, drink 3 coffees, and dominate the meeting. The devotional tells you to walk into that same meeting entirely empty, acknowledging your weakness so that the wisdom can actually flow through you. That is a radically subversive way to operate in a modern economy.
It is inherently subversive. And that subversion ultimately loops back to the final circle the text addresses, which is the church itself.
Right.
The devotional states that prayer builds unity, strengthens leaders, and opens hearts by placing everything at the feet of Jesus. So the individual journey of the liquid fast, the friction in the home, the stress in the workplace, it all returns to the collective.
Yeah.
A church operating on this frequency isn't just a gathering of people. It is a mobilized unit operating on a completely different power grid.
Okay, so we've mapped out the how and the where, right?
Mhm.
How this first response mindset alters the home, the office, and the congregation.
Yeah.
But if we dig into the why,
Mhm.
why does this specific mechanism of emptiness and surrender generate so much power? The devotional doesn't just offer this as some modern self-help theory. It anchors the entire concept in the ultimate historical and theological blueprint.
The events of Gethsemane.
Exactly, the events of Gethsemane leading up to the cross.
This is where the devotional moves from practical application into really deep theology. It draws a very specific, deliberate timeline of the Passion narrative. It focuses heavily on the chronological order of events.
Right. The phrasing in the text is incredibly precise here. It points out that before Jesus faced the cross, he prayed.
Yes.
Before he carried the weight of humanity, he surrendered his own will. Before the stone was rolled away on Resurrection Sunday, his strength was found kneeling.
Kneeling.
The kneeling is the prerequisite for the strength.
And the chronology is the entire point. The devotional is making a critical distinction here. The prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane was not a strategy to escape the pressure.
Right.
It wasn't a negotiation to get out of the crucifixion.
Yeah.
It was the exact mechanism used to receive the power necessary to endure it, to overcome it, and to ultimately rise from it.
You know, it reminds me of the concept of tensile strength in architecture or engineering.
Okay, tell me more.
Think about a massive suspension bridge. The cables on that bridge aren't trying to resist or escape the tension. The massive crushing weight and the tension are actually what give the bridge its structural integrity.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
If you remove the tension, the bridge just collapses. True strength isn't asking for the load to be removed. It is the capacity to bear the load without breaking. And the devotional is essentially arguing that in Gethsemane, Jesus wasn't asking for the cables to be cut. He was anchoring the tension to the Father.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The text explicitly relies on Matthew 26.41 to cement this idea. It says, "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak."
The flesh is weak.
Right. The flesh, our human nature wants the load removed. The flesh demands comfort. It wants to avoid the tension, the pain, and the cross entirely. But the spirit recognizes that the tension is the conduit for the power.
So if we connect the theology of Gethsemane back to the listener at Baseline Family Church, the physical surrender of food during this 5-day liquid fast is fundamentally a bodily rehearsal of Gethsemane.
It is a literal biological enactment of not my will, but yours.
Yeah.
The human body, the flesh, is screaming for its own will. It wants sustenance, it wants a sandwich, it wants relief from the pressure.
Give me a burger? Yeah.
Exactly. But by maintaining the liquid fast, the individual is willfully denying the demands of the flesh. They are stepping into the pressure of depletion, not as some masochistic exercise, but because they understand that surrendering physical comfort is the exact structural requirement to open the pipeline to spiritual power.
Are taking the abstract theology of surrender and making it deeply, uncomfortably physical.
Exactly.
And that concept, a bodily rehearsal of surrender, completely changes how you view a fast. It's not a diet. It is an act of theological defiance. And that sets up the closing prayer provided in the devotional for day 1 so perfectly. The text guides the reader to ask God to anchor their heart to the cross and to open their eyes to the promise of resurrection life. It ties everything we've discussed, the tension in the marriage, the spreadsheet error at work, the physical hunger pangs right back to that central narrative.
Yes, leading to life.
Intentional depletion resulting in ultimate, unshakable power.
It perfectly synthesizes the paradox. You cannot experience the power of the resurrection if you haven't first submitted to the emptiness of the tomb. The fast is the tomb. The prayer is the lifeline.
It's the siphon principle realized in human flesh. You empty yourself out so completely that the vacuum pulls heaven down into the mundane reality of a Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
So to bring this deep dive into the source material to a close, let's just look at the immense territory this text covers. The devotional used by Baseline Family Church takes a grueling 5-day reality of a liquid fast and transforms it into a masterclass on the mechanics of power.
It really does.
It demands that you abandon the capitalist instinct to accumulate and instead embrace the vacuum. It forces a shift from treating prayer as a panic-driven last resort during a structural collapse to utilizing it as the first response foundation.
And it meticulously tracks how that internal rewiring alters external reality.
Yes.
It turns the irritability of hunger into the dissolution of ego in a marriage. It shifts the anxiety of parenting into active, unseen defense. And it completely dismantles the wall between the sacred and the secular, bringing the power of the Holy Spirit right into the high-pressure environment of the modern workplace.
And it anchors every bit of that practical advice in the profound historical blueprint of Gethsemane. It proves that real power doesn't come from escaping the tension or the pressure of life. It comes from the kneeling surrender of our own will. Which brings us to a final thought for you to explore on your own today. Whether you are actually fasting with Baseline Family Church or just navigating the chaos of a normal week. The devotional places a massive emphasis on the fact that prayer fights unseen battles and invites power into the smallest, most easily overlooked tasks.
The mundane stuff.
Right. So if you were to genuinely adopt this first response mindset today, what is one unseen challenge or one deeply frustrating, seemingly insignificant task on your to-do list right now that might fundamentally change if you actively surrendered it before you even attempted to solve it?
That's a great question.
What if you stopped trying to muscle through it with your own depleted battery and instead allowed the emptiness to pull the power through you? It is absolutely something to consider the next time you feel the panic of running on empty.